Can I take you back real quick to the '84 games and just remind you of some of the moments that happened during those games? Rayford Johnson lit the Olympic torch, the first African-American to light the torch. We had the first women's marathon. Do you remember Joan Benoit hitting the track, looking around and realizing that she was by herself? That moment of excitement to see her win that. The first televised Olympic wheelchair race. That men's gold medal winning basketball team. Baseball was a demonstration sport out at Dodger Stadium. And Peter Ueberroth was later named Time Magazine Man of the Year. But also when I think of the '84 games, I think of the elegant figure of Edwin Moses in those 13 steps. I couldn't believe that people counted steps in between the hurdles. I just thought you ran. But we would count those steps, and he could do it in 13 steps in between each hurdle. In the 1984 Olympics, he won the gold. It was his second gold medal. His first came in Montreal in '76, and his first international meet where he set the world record. He was a different kind of athlete. He was so dominant that he won 122 consecutive races at one point, including 107 consecutive finals over nearly a 10-year span in the 400-meter hurdles. He is a phenomenal athlete, and there is an upcoming documentary about his career called 13 Steps. Let's check out a preview.
Running 400 hurdles is a catastrophe waiting to happen. It's an inner body experience.
You know, he was like Superman in real life.
The ability to overcome and produce your best for years, it's unbelievable.
100+ races, one in a row. Who's doing that?
Edwin Moses is the greatest of all time as the 400-meter hurdler.
My father was a military officer, very highly educated. I grew up books on anatomy, physiology, botany.
He had that stick-to-itiveness, very persistent in everything that he did.
He didn't aspire to be an athlete. He had tended to become an engineer.
He was going to approach the whole thing using the physics and mathematics.
Trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B while jumping over C, D, E, F, and G.
With his glasses, if you didn't see him run, he might have been the only person who believed he could do that.
He was coming on the scene pretty hot and heavy. Who is this guy?
Now, that quiet confidence was always there.
It was very intimidating.
That's the attitude you have to have.
Who wants to be second? And he looked unbeatable.
Wow, this is like great, except for the money.
Payment of athletes had been formalized because of work Edwin had done.
Before 1980, you weren't allowed to earn money.
I never got paid a cent.
I was a radical. We didn't get what we deserved. We just didn't run.
Alles, was macht, ist auf Moral orientiert.
I believe in principles of fairness and equity.
Neither I nor any member of my team took anything illegal.
Doping scandal was in this black box.
Sponsors, sport organizers don't want to acknowledge that these performances are actually fraudulent.
You need to have random testing during competitions.
Moses was one of the keys to that box.
It was a fight for doing the right thing.
The way he had to find solutions gave him the attitude of a champion.
Watch out for me. Keep your eyes on me.
He demonstrated that you can fight for racial change and be the quiet gentleman.
Watch out for me.
The ability to help kids, you can't buy that kind of satisfaction.
Irgendwann hat gesehen, dass die Welt ein bisschen verändern kann.
A legend.
That looks fascinating, doesn't it? This man is so much more than just an athlete. And by the way, holds a degree in physics from Morehouse, a MBA from Pepperdine, Okay, come on, Morehouse, let's go. An honorary degree from University of Massachusetts, Boston. He is chairman of the Loris World. He was chairman of the Loris World Sports Academy. Please join me in welcoming the one and only Dr. Edwin Moses. First things first, you look like you could still run.
It's an optical illusion. I've run 26,000 miles and don't want to put in too many more.
No, you're done. I want to start with your athletic achievements. When did you figure out that you were different?
It was 4 months before the Olympic Games in '76. When I went, I was unrecruitable coming out of high school. My freshman year, I was 5'6", 102. I was like 5'7", 117, not too much bigger than that when I went to Morehouse. And I was always the smallest guy on the team and always in the back. So I always lost until I started winning. So I was a little kid that was out there running against guys that were 6, 8 inches taller than me. And it took me years to catch up. But my coach, in the film, he actually said Edwin was the smallest guy out there, but the way that you could measure him was not by his size. He said, you look at the stopwatch. So I was always behind, and I used to chase bigger guys down and chased everybody down. And once I got to the top and started winning, once I beat someone, they very seldom beat me again. So I just started at the bottom and loved the sport, was unrecruitable, no scholarship, went on academic. So I was not the classical sportsman.
So you seem like the perfect kid for what we've been talking about today, that you may not be the champion, but being involved in sport
absolutely
changes your life.
That's right.
Tell us about that.
Well, I was very lucky. My mom and dad they both went to HBCUs, and they were both educators. So my dad was a Tuskegee Airman and a school principal and a Kappa, so, you know, worked the paddle and or the Army belt, you know. Yeah. So discipline and education was really key in my family. And I grew up in a very special time when, because of the social experiment that Lyndon Johnson put in, the Great Society, all the kid had to do was go to the park. And in the summer, the teachers were working in the parks.
Yes.
So they had art, they had music, they had reading, we had science fairs, a swimming pool, baseball teams, all that. So all the kid had to do was go to the park. And you had your school teachers from the whole neighborhood that were there every day. So I grew up in a time where your mom and dad in the morning, they might go to work and they just give you a clean towel and some swim trunks and tell you to go to the park, and the park was your babysitter, and we didn't have to worry.
I think a lot of people forget about that in the 60s, how the United States was a very different place, and it was one of those times you look at Reconstruction and the 60s as those moments.
The civil rights era was really just beginning to change, but all over the city, I come from Dayton, Ohio, all the kid had to do was go to the park. I was probably 4th, 5th grade. My mom was a Head Start teacher. She ran the Head Start program, so I was volunteering doing that during the day with the 5, 6-year-olds, carrying them around and giving them orange juice and cookies and sandwiches. So I grew up in a whole family full of that kind of mission.
Okay, so you grow up, you become this incredible Olympic athlete, and then you just can't lose. No one can beat you. Was there a moment where you were like, I might be Superman?
That's what they say. For me, it was a different experience because I was Urkel. I was the Urkel in my high school class. That was me. I mean, I had slide rules and, you know, 10th, 11th grade, taking chemistry and physics. I was shorter. I went to kindergarten, like, I was the youngest one. I went to the kindergarten when I was like 4 and a half. Everybody else was older, so I was always the smallest. So I never really thought of myself. Got cut from basketball, cut from the football team, got my helmet twisted around looking out the ear hole because I was, you know, 5'6", 102, playing football in high school. But I never gave up. I was tenacious, but I never saw myself as like even wanting to be a professional athlete, an Olympian. It just happened. I caught the window. I was prepared. Beyond, I mean, it's like a fantasy. At Morehouse, we had no track, no field, no stadium. I was jumping fences for 5 years when I was in college. So the story is really like impossible for me to have gone from unrecruitable in high school studying physics, looking like Urkel. 3 years later, I'm an Olympic champion. Yeah, so I was on the case when the time came. And I was lucky that I went to Morehouse. I could have had I gone to any other school in the country, major university with all the facilities, everything, it would have never happened. I was just in a special place with special energy at the time in my life when I was amenable and absorbing information of all types.
You know, there was a point where you were the face of track and field, but not only the face of track and field was a big deal. And on Saturdays when, you guys were in Europe and everything, your race would be the last race that they would show on television to hold the TV audience.
Yeah.
What were those moments like?
Track and field in Europe, it's not even as big today as it was back in the 70s and 80s. Yeah. We had a couple of peculiar events going on. Number one, it was Cold War. It was USSR, East Germany, the Iron Curtain, the countries behind the Iron Curtains who were state-supported, versus basically amateur athletes that were uncompensated. No one was getting paid. The Track and Field Federation, the Olympic Committee didn't support any of us. So we were like an army of volunteers. And from a diplomatic point of view, we were like soldiers going to compete in communist countries and representing the United States. So there was a whole different type of arc that we lived in that gave us a different type of impetus and will to win and represent our country. Track and field was bigger than Formula One.
Yep.
It was bigger than soccer at the time, because if you played soccer in England, they had the FA in England. You only watched it on BBC. The French Soccer League was only on French TV. The Italian was only on Italian. So there was no the World Cup was one event that was every 4 years, and track and field was almost as big as that.
Oh, yeah.
So track and field had the most advertising, international, the TDKs and the Panasonics and the Coca-Colas. It was the #1 sport in the world during that time.
And you were the guy.
#1.
Today we've been talking so much about athletes as activists. And why is that so important? And why do athletes have a responsibility to advocate for the future of sports, but also social change?
My experience is that I grew up in an academic family. There was a lot going on in the 70s. My mom and dad were very much involved in desegregating the high schools in Ohio. The Head Start programs, the Boys Club, YMCA, the parks, those things were very important. And as I said, I volunteered when I must have been 4th or 5th grade. So I grew up in a family that really volunteered, and I saw what that meant and saw how it helped the community. So for me to move into philanthropy in the late 90s, early 2000s with Laureus, for me it was just a natural move. It wasn't as though I was forcing myself to do something philanthropic. I just knew that the need was there. I recognized it. I was in a position to do something about it. So it's very different today. And some athletes get involved with philanthropic because it's a part of their branding. I became involved in it because it was a part of life and actually making things happen and being on the ground. And I learned that 10, 11, 12 years old. So I look at it from a very different point of view.
You mentioned those athletes today. What should change about the way that athletes interact with their communities and the cities that they're in, and how can they help change the narrative? Because we have so many kids who don't have access to play in sports. And then we have someone in our city making $40, $50 million.
I think there's a lack of a couple of things. Safe spaces for kids, like the parks that we used to go to. I mean, in most of the cities, the kids can't go to the park. That's the last place they want to be. And when I was in Dayton, probably in high school, it was the end of the Vietnam War, the parks became a little bit unsafe because we had a lot of junkies who used to go and use drugs in the park.
Yeah.
We used to see a lot of needles. I remember asking my mom, what are all these needles always doing out there? And that was as I got older. But physical education. And when I grew up, I don't know about the rest of you, we had gym 3 days a week.
Yeah, you did.
White socks, gym shoes, white shorts, T-shirts, physical education tests. You had to do pull-ups, push-ups, tumble, play volleyball, basketball, play dodgeball. And it was like a criterion that every kid had to do. So we didn't have a lot of obese kids back then because kids played outside, either in the woods, hiking, in the parks. We didn't have any electronic devices, so kids were doing things every day.
Yeah.
So we grew up a lot differently, and I think that's what's lacking today, physical education. And it's a known epidemic, a lack of physical fitness in the schools where the kids they're not required to go to gym class and have physical activity, which would help them to help their mental status.
Yeah, nobody wanted to fail that president's test that you had to take in phys ed.
We had to take that president's test. That was 6 points.
Yeah,
like
you were.
We had to run 600 yards. Every kid had to run 600.
Remember that?
They didn't care whether you limped around or whatever, but everyone went around this field that we had. Mm-hmm. It was measured, and yeah, you could walk, run, whatever, but you were going to run 600. You were going to shoot 10 free throws from halfway. You were going to do the monkey bars. You were going to play volleyball, tumbling, all of that. It was required. And even the kids that weren't physically able, I remember one student, she was very, very large, and everybody used to kid her. And we just got her to the point where the kids jumped in and assisted her and walked her through everything.
That's amazing.
You know, we looked out for her and made sure that she was able to do it because she was uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, she was playing basketball, hanging on monkey bars, everything, because we looked out for her as kids.
What advice do you have for the people in this room that are working to help children and youth sports move forward? What advice do you have for organizations out there on how they can advance and help with play equity, especially in the inner cities where it's bad?
It's a very large space out there. Fortunately, my experiences at Laureus, we've been in like 60 countries around the world. We've had hundreds of projects, and I've personally seen like the worst of the worst, the armpit of the world in terms of the way kids are treated. But the space is very big, and in many cases, the people that are in this room don't really get the recognition. No one knows who you are, but I'm always congratulating people like you because you're where the rubber meets the road. Once you get the funding, you have to have people that are really willing to make it possible for kids to reach another level, whether you're dealing with childhood obesity or mental trauma or latchkey kids or diabetes or whatever it may be. The people in this room are the people that really make it happen. And I always appreciate it. I always thank the staff, where we have staff all over the world that actually do the dirty work, that actually accumulate the kids that are out there in the dust and making things happen.
Please, a round of applause for yourselves, for what you all have done.
Absolutely.
For real, you're all changing lives. Before we go, I want to talk about the documentary real quick. Can I ask you a personal question, though? Where did those shells come from you used to wear around? You remember those shells you used to wear around your neck?
Beads.
The beads. You still got them? You still got them? Oh, you still got them. There you go.
They're like 70 years old now.
Everybody remembered those shells because they'd be bouncing up and down.
Actually, leather knots.
Leather knots?
Yeah, it's a piece of, you would tie up army boots or something with them, just tied up.
Wow. Okay, all right, now I know. But I remember it used to be so cool. I'd be like, what is that necklace? Tell me about how the documentary came about.
I started planning in 1997. I did a budget for a documentary with a really good friend of mine who produces documentaries, and we went through the whole process, came up with the budget. But it wasn't until 3 years ago, in 2021, one of my colleagues at Laureus met, his name is Leo Hesch, Broadview TV in Germany. They had done documentaries on Al Pacino, Sharon Tate, Kaepernick, Angela Merkel, the Klitschko brothers, Nowitzki. They had done a wide range of documentaries, but never of an American athlete. And so they introduced me to these guys, and we talked for probably like 6 or 9 months about the story and the narrative. They're a German film company, so they don't have some of the experiences I talked about here this afternoon, they didn't know what I was talking about. So it became a mission to really kind of explain the narrative, what I saw, what I felt, and more so bring the people in that experience not what I experienced, but during those times, experienced the same thing, like the Spike, Sam Jackson, Tommy Smith is in the movie. He wasn't even in the documentary, but what we saw in the 60s and 70s, and not necessarily that had anything to do with me running track, but really directed my life into many of the activities that I was able to participate in. So it was like a 3-year, this is 2024, we started in 2021 remotely, and it's been 3 years of doing interviews. And
wow. When will it be available and where?
Anytime now. They're working on distribution right now. We've had a couple of events, so we figure it will come out before the Olympic Games. Between now and the Olympic Games.
It looks fascinating, as you know.
Yeah, the trailer is nothing compared to the film. It really goes into a lot of the things we've talked about.
Yeah.
Not only through my view, but through other people's view of how our lives came together in certain points. So it's like 15 or 16 or 17 people and what they saw from their point of view, looking at me do what I did on the track, but life in general at the same time. It's a very, very different type of documentary.
Cannot wait to see it. Yeah. And as the son of a Tuskegee grad, I understand those Tuskegee Airmen, they create special people, and you are one of them. Ladies and gentlemen, the incomparable, one of the greatest to ever do it, the greatest, right?
Thank you.
Edwin Moses. Thank you so much.
All right.